All right, so this, again, this is a copy of the book. And this is the PDF version that you get for being a member of PMI. So $32, you get an electronic copy of this book. If you log into Blackboard, which we'll see if this can handle switching tabs on this poor thing. If you log into Blackboard and you look at course documents over there on the left, and I know I'm not getting the whole screen because, again, I'm on this ancient laptop. So if you come over here, I have added a second textbook that you might find easier for some of these parts to understand and to use as a resource. It is not required for you to read it, but it's probably a darn good idea because this one seems to make a little more, it's easier to read. The PMBOK guide, it really is a framework, and it's written as such. It's not an easy-to-read document. This one might give you some insight into some of those processes and pieces we're going to talk about that makes a little more sense. So if I open this, it opens as inside of there, or you can open it externally. This one is an open source OER textbook. It's free. You can grab it anywhere. It's not always the best, but it does explain sometimes some of these concepts a little easier for you. So about the book, can you scroll down? It does talk about careers and some of the other things we're going to look at. So it's another really good resource to go out there and grab and download and take a look at. It can help you out a little bit with some of these concepts because we do have a lot of concepts and ideas in here. So let me go back to our original guide. Scroll back all the way to the top here really quickly. So when you look at this, and when you get the physical book, those of you that have bought the physical book, it's a big, chunky, beefy pile of materials. And in fact, it's actually two books in one. So there's actually, if you flip through it, there's an Agile guide portion, and then there's our project management. And the reality is, when we start looking at Agile, that's kind of the way the world is moving towards. As things get quicker and quicker and quicker, Agile project development starts to make a lot more sense. So what we ask you to read this week is pages 0 through 64, I believe. Is that correct? It's possible. Which is essentially the introduction. I need to go up a little further. I thought it was up on the top. So essentially, you're looking at the beginning of this idea of project management, its competencies, what kind of things you're going to look at. We also said you need to go find the glossary. And the glossary is something, I don't expect you to memorize the glossary, but you need to know where it's at. You should be able to go through it and look at key terms and be able to understand it. So it's worth going through and reading, looking at some of those terms, because you're going to see them over and over again. The glossary is actually on page 695, if you look through here. If you scroll all the way down to page 695, that's where you'll find that glossary hiding. Now, the weird thing, if you look at the top of the screen when we have an ebook, if you've got the ebook version, the page numbers, the pagination that shows in PDF is different than the pagination that shows on the page itself. Because all of those prefixes and things that aren't numbered in a regular document are numbered, because this program just counts the total number of pages. So some of these look different. So you need to make sure you're looking at the page on the book, not the page on the... So at the bottom of each page, there is a page number. But notice those are like Roman italics 1, 2, 3. But the PDF reading program doesn't know that. So be aware of that. So there's some differences in those page numbers. And I see that on a lot of electronic textbooks. The pagination is just slightly different to make life miserable. So this is the tables. You can get all this information out of there, but what we're going to look at is chapter 1. If I can ever get there on this one without a mouse. So the first thing it does is tell you how to use the very same book that you're looking at. Why do we care about project management? Why do we care? If we're a business student, why do we care about project management? What has project management done for us? Well, it has a class to our schedule we have to take. But have we used project management historically for anything? Have we had projects? Maybe the first thing we need to do is define what a project is. So what is a project? What is the definition of a project? I can guarantee that will be on the finals and on the midterms. What is the definition of a project? So if you don't know, because you don't have the book or you haven't, if I look online, what is the definition of a project? What is a project and why is it special? Why is it different than our ongoing operations? So we're building cars every day. That's operations management. What is different about project management? If there's no difference, why do we have two classes?
Operations overall function in the company was project as one particular part of the company, like the project owner designing new cars instead of doing the whole car assembly.
Okay, so somewhat, that's a part of it, but there's some specific details about a project that make it unique. Some specific requirements about a project that define it. So, what is a defining term for a project? What is unique about it compared to ongoing operations? So, you're achieving something, a specific goal. You're achieving a specific goal. Projects are time limited. They have an expiration date. They expire. They have a specific goal. They're unique. In other words, it's not the same thing over and over and over again. They are unique, and they have an expiration date. Now, does that mean every project succeeds? And in fact, in the world of project management, projects succeed only about 2/3 of the time. And when we get to what we call the end of a project, we're going to even look at what do we determine is successful, but we need to know what that project is. So if I am running a daycare, is that very similar every day, over and over and over again? On the other hand, if I am remodeling a house, when I remodel a house, are those different? When I go into a house, is there any house that's completely identical to another house? What about a building on campus here? If I'm going to remodel this building, is there another building that is exactly like T.J. Majors in the world? And part of that is we also look at another environmental factor. When I go out and I work on a highway, when I rebuild the highway from 75, and hopefully at some point they make it 4-lane all the way to Nebraska City from Auburn, is there any other stretch on earth that is exactly like that? The ground rises, the ground falls, the ground composition is X, Y, and Z. It's unique. And so we run into project management in all different kinds of fields. When I design software for Apple Computer, is there anything like that in the world that I'm designing some brand new program that's going to make me $1 jillion billion? No. So projects are unique. They are temporary in nature. In other words, they have an end date. That doesn't mean they might not be very long. How many of you have driven in Council Bluffs on Interstate 80? That construction project is a project. It's unique. It certainly is unique. But as far as I can see, it's been going on for 30 years. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have a defined finish, but that finish just keeps getting further and further out there. So we need to make sure that we understand what a project is. So projects, a temporary endeavor to create a unique product, service, or a result. So it doesn't have to have a tangible result, bless you. It could be an intangible result. But it's undertaken to do something. So when I build cars, I do have a project. A project is to build the factory. A project is to design how to build the cars. The ongoing operations of that project or that plant are operations management. That does not mean that we will put projects all over inside of that as we change things. So as the Mustang changes from the 2020 year to the 2022 model cycle or whatever it happens, there will be projects to change that, but it is unique. So there may be some things internally that are repetitive inside of our project, but the entire project itself is not repetitive. So unique, temporary, and it tries to have a specific result or a specific item at the end of it. So make sure you can define a project. So something that's unique. So those people that are building Ford Mustangs are probably not doing a project. Now if you watch car shows and you see somebody building one of these one-off custom hot rods, that would be a project. It's got a due date. They have a car show they need to go to. It's unique. There's probably never been a car cobbled together out of Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler components like they're just doing. And it has a specific target at the end. They're going to build a car. We're going to build some software, whatever that happens to be. So here's some examples. And so some of you, I get the question fairly often of, well, I've never been on a project. You've never been on a project you formally identified. I can guarantee every one of you has done a project. Have you written a paper that is unique to you? That could be a project. Have you worked with a group at some kind of an organization to get an end goal? That could be a project. Have you written a piece of software and created a competitor to Microsoft Windows? I know you're working on it, Marcus. That could be a project. So they list some examples. So if you've been involved in merging a business together, that could be a project. You have a specific end goal. So they have a list of some of them here, and some of those, we really use building and construction a lot as a reference because everybody can wrap their head around how a building or a house or a bridge is built. You can see it, and so it's a little more tangible. In other words, I can touch it. That looks kind of creepy, by the way. So you can touch the items on a construction project. And so sometimes that makes it easier to wrap our heads around. So it's temporary. So there's different ways that a project can have an end. It can be completed. Okay, that would be great. We may decide we can't continue, that it's no longer, that we don't have the money to finish the project. All right. We may find that we no longer need it. And that happens in our world a lot, especially in things like software. So Apple's developing some new program, and all of a sudden a competitor introduces a program that's going to do the exact same thing, and they've already got it out on the market. And you have to make that decision. Hey, I've already got a couple $100 million in this product, but I'm going to pull it. We're no longer competitive. We don't have that edge. And so sometimes we do it. Sometimes we have a reality of that there's no longer a need for it. We also have the idea that physical or human resources, and that is one of the big issues, especially right now with our unemployment rate so low. It's hard to get people in some cases to do things because we can't find the resources to do them. And so sometimes projects end up kind of falling by the wayside. And then there may be a legal cause. Sometimes legal issues happen. And we say, oh, that project was really a great idea, but now we can't do it. Some law came into pass. So things that have happened, for example, there were some websites. And again, creating a website can be a project. It's unique. And there were projects that were doing things like going out and scraping all of the state websites for photos of people being booked into jail. And there were lawsuits against that. And so for legal reasons, some companies have actually pulled those. I think it was like mugshots.com or something. And they found out that there were going to be some legal ramifications. That idea of that legalistic ending to our project. So why do we do this? So this chart, I think, in our book illustrates why we have projects in a company better than anything else. We're in business, right? All of us are business students. What is a business about? What are we trying to do in a business? Make money. We make money for the stockholders. If we own it, we make money for it. We're trying to grow. Even as a nonprofit, do we try to grow at Peru State College? Yeah, that's how we survive, is through growth. So projects, so here we are, here's over time. The idea of these projects add value. We're trying to add business value to it. At the minimum, we're trying to sustain our business position. Hopefully, we're growing in that business position, and we are a vital competitor. What happens in business if we don't innovate and we don't change and we don't stay with what's going on in the world around us? When you go downtown in almost any small town, how many closed businesses do you see? Are they everywhere? So think about a grocery store in a small town. Where do you guys really go buy groceries right now? Auburn? Walmart in Nebraska City? So if I'm not willing to make changes and create a project that says, I'm going to put out products that are friendly to Peru State College and have some competitive edge, I'm going to stay here. Meanwhile, Walmart's over here, and eventually I'm going to close down. And it's very hard. We have to realize that things change. So projects, in a lot of cases, are also about change. So how many people in here have ran into somebody who hates change? Do your parents hate change? You ran into, some people do. You run into a business, and you walk in and you go, man, this place hasn't changed in 25 years, and I see why they're going out of business. So the reality is, projects enable businesses to create value. So there's some other things that they can do. So we talked about that, those tangible. So products, services, they may create market share. In other words, we're increasing our ability. But they may also do other things, those intangible things you've talked about in marketing. Things like goodwill. So we may do a project that doesn't really return a tangible benefit. It doesn't give it its market advantage, but it generates goodwill. So a lot of companies have nonprofit pieces that go out and assist nonprofit organizations. They do that not only because they're a kind and wonderful organization, but it generates goodwill and publicity, right? But it's a little harder to measure that goodwill and that publicity. So if you go to almost any small town, and you'll see stickers in windows of, hey, I support the local school, and those kinds of things. Those are that idea of generating that goodwill and what we're going to do. So the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out, do we need a project? How do we start that project? And if we're a small company, so you've got one owner and 3 people, projects are kind of an informal, hey, let's go out and create a new marketing campaign to attract Peru State College students. It's pretty small and it's easy. On the other hand, on a larger corporation, we have some very formal chains of command we have to go through and some processes. But the reality is, these are some of the ideas about why we may need to do it. So do we have to change things at the college? And sometimes I like to use the college as a great model. Do we have to change things because of the law? Have laws changed? They have. And in fact, we do make changes, and we a lot of times have to create a project to make changes in one of our systems or in our project. And so all the time we're looking at differences. So if you're in financial aid, has anybody done a work study in financial aid in here? Ooh, Dolores. Do you guys have, when you were in there, financial aid seems like there's new directives about every week about different things. And so sometimes those affect how we're going to do programming in MyPSC. We have a lot of other departments. And through legal means or other directives, we've had to change. We also have this stakeholder request. So at Peru, is there any one entity that owns the college? It's a state, so there's not a group of stockholders that can force that. But there are certainly stakeholders who have impact. So state legislature, the public opinion, newspapers, all of those kinds of things can actually do that. And sometimes it's because we need to stay competitive. And so 15, 16 years ago when we started on online education, there wasn't really a lot of other places doing it. And it gave us at that point a competitive edge. Is that true any longer? Does virtually every college have online education available now? And in fact, here's a shocker because we advertise it, so it must be true. Are we the lowest cost online school? How many of you are in class here because it was the cheapest place you could go? Ooh, a couple of you. All right, don't look and see how cheap other places can be at this point then. Because the reality is, with economies of scale, some other places have created projects to try to get that market share of students or those to grab them. And so there are a couple of universities who have been able to do things that are different. We have how many prices at Peru State College for a credit hour? So we have an on-campus rate that doesn't have fees, and we have an online rate that's got everything bundled together. But I can't create a separate pay rate. So if you are going in a program, say nursing, which we don't have, that you would have a higher tuition rate. I can't target market that. And I can't target it by geographic area. So I can't sit down and look at the United States map and say, I want to target Omaha and Lincoln. And if you're in one of those target markets, I'm going to give you a $120 a credit hour class. There are some universities that have been able to sit down and do that. So again, those ideas, those projects, they created a project to do those kinds of things. So that's some of the main reasons why we're looking at a project then to create value. And so you can see this little chart. There's a lot of those charts. When you're reading the book, these charts really do give value in here and help explain. So here's some of the ideas that can drive the creation of some kind of a project. So, again, another chart. One of the biggest ones we see right now is this idea of new technology. New things are changing around us. We also see a lot of, see if I can read this up here. So, if we look at environmental concerns, there are a lot of companies that are affected by environmental concerns. So these are some of the more common, more popular things that are drive change. Is this an exhaustive list? Can there be other reasons? Could it be the CEO of the corporation says, hey, we want to do something and we're going to do whatever it is, create a monkey house in the middle of our campus? Sure, it can happen and it does. And that creates then a project. One of the more interesting ones we've had on our campus here, how many of you have seen the Little Red Schoolhouse? How many of you know why it's there? Do it, Justin. Yeah, it was on Highway 75. It really had, to those people that had went there, it probably had historical significance. Has zero ties to our college, other than maybe some student from there went to Peru State College. But the president at the time, he was a very ego-driven individual. The president at the time, not our current president, by the way, drove by and said, I think we should do that. and demanded that we figure out a way to do that, or that the foundation figure out a way to buy that and transport it here. Thought it would make a nice shrine or whatever it has become. So for the entire time I was here until a couple of years ago, it sat empty. And until they remodeled this building and they decided to put air conditioning and wiring in it, it really just sat there for no good reason. So now it's got some information about our 150th anniversary, but the reality is that project to move it here didn't really fill any of those other than somebody said, hey, let's do it, and they had a position of power. Ah. Is it the first one in Nemaha County?
Yes, it was the first one, and not only did the college pay for it, but Nemaha County also helped pay for it.
Did it? Okay. So, did it advance the cause of education on our campus, though? No. And in fact, when it happened, we were in a fairly significant budget crisis, and it was not long after they were about to close this college and move what was going to be left of it to Nebraska City. But again, so there are reasons why we do these projects. These are just some of them. So I just wanted to point out there can be other things that can happen. All of those are valid reasons, though. If I could read the screen, it would be really nice. All right, so why do we do that? Why do we have formalized project management? We're going to talk a lot about some of these details, but if we don't have formalized project management, how many of you have written a group paper in here? And how many of those little group projects went horribly wrong in a paper? So, without that idea of formal constraints and a process, sometimes our projects fall apart very quickly. And so that's why we study this, is we look at that. We have to deal with things like feature and cost scope, and we'll look at something here pretty soon called the triple constraint. How do we deal with some of those costs? So, I know that this is a question that pops up a couple of times on a quiz. The difference between project, program, portfolio, operations management. So these are all terms we throw out there. And so we've kind of defined operations management as ongoing. And we said, here's a project, here's kind of a small scale, here we're going to change things. And we said those are kind of two sides of a hat. So if one's a left shoe, one's a right shoe. So we have to have projects. Projects lead to operations in a lot of cases. But what we really want to look at is in our business, most of the time, we don't have every resource devoted to a single project. We have multiple projects going on at the same time. And so we have a portfolio of projects. So not only do you have somebody managing an individual project, so maybe the project to move the schoolhouse to our campus. Maybe we have the project to renovate the theater, which is going on. Maybe we have a project to redo the air conditioning in the administration building. All of those things have or will occur or are occurring. So we have to have ability to manage those shared resources. In a lot of cases, people, places, things, equipment. On top of that, we have operations. And operations over here share that same shared resources. So we have that overarching group that manage that entire portfolio. That portfolio can include projects, it can include ongoing operations. So if you want to think about it, that policy, we even have a class called business policy, that really manages then both sides of that. In fact, your strategic marketing case that you're working on, any of you in 495 right now? Anybody taken it yet? You have? So your strategic marketing game that you do, not only do you manage operations, but you launch new projects inside of it. Yeah. So you're managing both sides of that. And so that's kind of how we build this idea. So again, that chart is kind of a really nice way to do it. This is also maybe even a better chart. It's not graphical, but it gives you that idea of a project versus a program versus that portfolio. So a project, that's our temporary endeavor. A program is a group of projects, subsidiary programs, program activities, everything all pieced together. So we go from individual to groups to an even bigger group if you go all the way to the portfolio. And so that portfolio then is a collection of projects, and programs, and everything all together. So these are different levels of scale. So small, medium, large, however you want to look at it in terms of that scaling. And so that might be the easiest way to look at this as an example. Can't see that one down that far. So program management, we don't do a lot in here with program management. There really are some standards, and you can actually get a program management guide, but we're going to kind of bypass that in operations management because we really want to get to the idea of project management. So operations management, again, even our book says, nope, outside the scope. So we cover that in another class. So all those horrible math formulas about how to maintain operations and inventory in process and work in process inventory and all those things, those we don't have to deal with. Here we go. Yeah, we don't have to deal with that business. So operations and project management really are the other side. Now, do operations and project management interact? Certainly. We use the same resources in some cases. When we transfer from a project to ongoing operations, there's a lot of involvement. So if we're the group that is handing off the air conditioning system or the new theater, that hands off to operations, but there's an exchange of information at the end of that. Because otherwise, those people having to run that building in the theater wouldn't have an idea about what's going on. They would be like, well, I don't know what this button over here does. So we have to have that exchange of information. And so sometimes one of the deliverables is an operating manual or something else. So here we include the idea of this kind of a loop. So our strategy drives those portfolios, which drives the projects, which really drive how do we increase business value. And that's what we're looking at. We want our business value to increase. Does every project lead to an increase in business value? So it's not automatic. And in fact, we have a really great case here at our campus of one that fell apart. And slightly before you guys were here, we wanted to ensure that our students were really getting the best education they could get, and we wanted to verify that they really had knowledge. And so we decided that we were going to take all of our online courses, and the final was going to be proctored on every one of those online finals. So as a student in class, you probably should be going, yeah, because I could have been online and been cheating the whole time and got the same degree you got while you're in class and we're torturing you, right? But that wasn't the reaction. Because remember I said we're not even necessarily the cheapest now. What did students do when we said we're going to proctor every online final? They went somewhere else. Now, what I will say is there's probably a small percentage of those that left at that point because they probably were cheating. Or in the case of at least one student we found out, they were paying somebody else to do the entire degree program for them. Interesting. Dad said you have to have a degree. I'm going to hire somebody to go take that college classes for me. Now, the reality is, have I checked any of your IDs? Do I really know who you are? Well, a couple of you, because I tortured you extensively. But the reality is, in a large university, do they check your IDs going to take a final? Actually, a lot of them have actually started that because of that same issue. If you have a lecture class with 600 people in it, do you think that professor knows everybody in there? No. Guaranteed. So projects don't automatically add value, but they're usually done for the right cause. So we hear the term life cycle. And so in project management, so it's birth, childhood, adulthood, where you're doing the work, and then death. So we start the project, we organize and prepare, We do the work of the project, and then we have an ending phase. So all of those have to be present. Those are present, just like they are for us. Now, that doesn't mean they all have the same timelines. There may be other pieces in there. But we need to think about it in terms of that. And so those project phases, we may move them into additional pieces. And depending on that corporate structure, you may have things like creating committees. You may have a project committee that you have to go ask, is this something we want to proceed with? Some companies may have 10 or 12 projects that all get moved into a committee, and they have to pick 4, or the ones that will come to $1 million, or the ones they have resources for, or the ones they have a legal priority to do. Not all projects make it out of that initiation phase. So what are we looking at? So you're starting to break it down in terms of our projects, our different phases of it. We have to deal with what are the requirements of that, how long is it going to take, what are the requirements, fiscal requirements, human resource requirements or human capital requirements. Knowledge requirements are becoming more and more important. Do we have the systems in place to support it? What kind of buildings, what kind of utilities, what are the resources needed to make this happen? And then as these individual phases, sometimes we have to look at how do we move from one phase to another? What has to be completed for us to move to the next phase of our project? What kind of deliverable has to be created? So, if I'm going to write a 10-page paper, are there phases to that paper? So, when I write a paper, do I have to research it? Yeah, I can't really write that paper before I have the research done. Well, let me rephrase. I can't write a grade A paper unless I do the research first. I have seen plenty of 10-page papers that had 0 research in them, but to be a successful paper, let's say, you have to do the research first. Then what do you do after you do the research? Do you just sit down and start typing? Or do you create an outline of your thought process? So those are those phases, and one phase leads into another phase. So very similar to a project. If I'm going to build a highway, the first thing I do isn't go out and start pouring concrete. I have to do all the dirt work, and that has to be done before I can start organizing for other pieces. So you may see things like looking for customer requirements in a project. And those customers, one of the terms and things we use that's a little confusing in project management is customers are not necessarily external. If I'm building a project at Peru State College, my customers very well may be coworkers here because they're using those services. So remember that customers can be internal or external at any point on one of these projects. So that just, again, these charts are really nice because what it's showing is the inputs, the techniques, that they all kind of flow from one to the other before we can get into our project. So, in the PMBOK, we have several different groups that we're going to deal with. So we're going to deal with integration management, scope management, schedule, cost, quality, resources. And so we used to differentiate resources, things like fiscal, and one of the trends now is we lump fiscal and human and everything really all in together because they really are interrelated. So we lump all the resources together. Communications is a big factor. We look at risk management, procurement management, how we obtain those resources that we need. And then one of the big ones is this idea of stakeholder management. And so we have to figure out who the stakeholders are and who we're responsible to and how do we manage them. And the management of the stakeholders and the communications really interrelate a lot. And one of the problems we have now isn't the lack of communications, it's almost that there are too easy of communications. And so oftentimes you'll have a single stakeholder, and they are monopolizing that communications channel. And so now that everybody has a phone on their hip, they're calling that project management every day. Hey, how's that project going? Let me talk to you about my... And the reality is they add little value to it in some cases. So we have seen that over and over again. So communication. So all of these knowledge areas, and there's 10 different areas here. Or actually 13, I guess, in this group now. So that's one they've changed a little bit on me. So you'll see that this matrix maps to where they land in the PMBOK guide. So if you want to look at resource management, well, look here. In the planning process chunk, we have 9192. In executing, in other words, making it happen, 93, 94, 95. Monitoring and controlling, which is also very important, 9.6. And then closing out, so notice those don't happen in the closeout phase, but they do in that integration piece. So this chart is one, when you get your book, I would put a bookmark in, because it's a great, hey, you know what, that doesn't work? So that's a great way you can look at what those different areas are, linked directly to them. So it's that kind of like a crosswalk. So when we start talking about executing resource management, you can go, aha, I know that I'm in section 9.2 or 9.3. So as we create a project, we generate a huge amount of data. And that data can be anything from individual reports, can be interviews, anecdotal. It may be, if we're creating a system, it may be how many lines of code we're generating a day. If we're building a road, it may be how much paving we've done. We generate a lot of data. And that data, we can overwhelm ourselves. So one of the things we have to deal with in project management now is data management. How do we comb, sift, filter, and create this dashboard for those stakeholders? In other words, they can see that, hey, the highway got another 1,000 feet built today, but we don't have to field 400 phone calls. And so that's a really common thing. And how do we know that that data, when we want to look at some of that data, is it the right data for what we're doing and what we're using? So data, we're going to grab data out of almost every piece of project management. And how do we store it? How do we communicate it? And sometimes that hard part is communicating what is good data and what is not good data to share with those stakeholders. And you can walk kind of a fine line with what is and what isn't. So you take that data, so we also have this term methodology. And so methodology a little more specific. So it's a specific method. So if we work for General Electric, they have a specific methodology. So they've looked at this guide and they've created their own specific set of methods of how to do things. If I think about enrolling in a college, is enrollment in every college fairly similar? But at Peru, we have a specific methodology. You log into MyPSC, you talk to your advisor. So that's the difference. Methodology is much more specific and narrowly focused. And so we're going to run into a lot of methodology models. So we can form this general framework into something a little more specific for our needs. So this covers project management from everything from, again, construction all the way down to software management. And we may find we need to tailor this a little bit so it fits a little better. So one of your upcoming documents, we're going to look at something called a project charter, which we're going to run into in just a little bit. But here's the bad thing about almost any project. It generates documentation and requires documentation. That is not the fun part of project management. I hate to tell you that, but at the beginning, to even initiate that project, we often have documentation. And so as we go further in, So one of the things you may have is things like a project business case. A business case says there's a business need, so sometimes we call those feasibility studies, or there's a lot of other different terminology. What you're trying to say is my project adds business value, and this is why. This project will cost $1 million, but it's going to return $17 million in economic benefit to the company. My business case is a new law has passed and we have to implement this change in our corporation. So in other words, you're making that case for yours. So then we have, usually they call it a project benefits plan. In other words, how do we continue that once we create that? So these are generally at the beginning of our project. That's where we meet in those committees. And you say, all right, well, I have 12 different projects. Here's my benefits to cost ratio. And you'll be able to see which projects can we undertake, which ones do we have to undertake. So that idea of methodologies are important, and sometimes we get them handed to us. So sometimes in IT, for example, information systems, you are handed a specific methodology because if you're working for a state government, you may get handed a set of documents from the state that says this is a methodology you're going to take to create a cybersecurity policy, a project we have to do. Whereas if you're with a large company, they may specify that you're using a specific methodology, and we'll have that detailed. So, pre-project, before we actually begin, that's when those things like our business case, our needs assessment, is this project necessary? Starting up, we're going to create something called a project charter. And actually in that course documents, you should have a sample project charter for a website now. Once we're actually getting closer, we're creating that plan. We're doing things like work breakdown structures. Then we're carrying out the work. And there may be additional phases in there as we go through it. It depends on how we're going to break this project down. And so then we always have to have that ending project phase of some sort. So as you read through there, you're going to find out that at needs assessment, we may run into, and I love this term, business as usual. In other words, we're going to do nothing. We may say we have a need, so you went through that assessment of needs. You may say you have a need, but yet you're just going to continue to operate as normal. Have we seen companies do that? Have we seen Peru State College do that occasionally? So we know that there's a need, but we don't have the ability or we don't have the resources to change that. Sometimes we do the minimum. That happens. So these are all different ways we can address those business needs. I'm trying to get the ideas that are most odd. So this idea of a project charter. So your first assignment that you're doing in there, a paper, your paper is about project management and the PMI group. Are there other project management groups out there? PMI is the biggest. So it's kind of like NCAA is the biggest group. Are there other groups similar to NCAA? Clearly, but we went with the biggest one in their modality. Makes the most sense, gives you the most flexibility. So your assignment then is you're looking at that PMI. How is it going to affect you? And there's some criteria, and you're looking at their history, and then you're looking at how it affects you. Your next paper coming up is going to be, you're going to create a project charter. So that charter is once we get approval. So we've done our feasibility study. We've said, oh, it looks like this is going to give benefits. That project charter then, that charter says this is our plan for that project. And so that's the next phase, if you want to think about it, of stuff we're going to do in here. So, the benefit management plan, we don't do a whole lot with in here. You're going to see references to it. But some of the things it includes are, remember from business finance, all those horrible math formulas you had to learn? That's part of that is, I have to be able to say that it has a return on investment or a payback period or whatever, net present value. Scammer from Leaf. Every day I get a call from the North Miami area code that I block, and then they move up one number, telling me that my Google pages need to be updated for a low cost of $399 or something. It's entertaining. Sometimes I talk to them just for the fun of it. So our projects don't exist in a vacuum. And so we need to deal with some of those environmental factors around our project. Maybe we have culture issues. Do different organizations have different business cultures? Some of you have already probably went to work somewhere and you went, whoa, these people are all weird. Does Cooper have, and we'll make fun of Dolores, pick on her. Does Cooper have a definitive business culture out there that is different than others? Do colleges have different business cultures? Yeah. Are they different than a traditional work environment? Sure. So the same way with our processes we're going to deal with here is there are different influences. We also can take some information out of what has happened previously. So we're going to find out a lot about what's going on. So we have this enterprise environmental factors. Some of the way they do these terms I think are just kind of ugly. EEFs just sounds really weird. So environmental cultures. So organizational cultures. Structure, governance. So we make a big deal every year about looking at those mission and values and beliefs. Companies do also. And sometimes companies have various different beliefs, and that may affect that project that you have. Where are our facilities located? That can certainly affect our project. If our project is to develop a new aqua ski device for out on the Gulf Coast, but we're located in Minnesota, that's going to have an effect on that project. So even that climate can have an effect. What kind of information technology is available? What kind of other resources? Can we contract out people? Do we not contract people? What kind of constraints do we have? How easy is it to purchase things? If a project requires a lot of travel, how difficult is travel within this company's corporate culture? And I will tell you that's one that's changed since I have been here at Peru. It used to be pretty easy to travel at Peru. And in fact, when I first got here, it was really easy. You traveled, you put it on your own credit card, you came back and you get reimbursed fairly quickly. And it was one small form. As it's grown, and we're looking at some travel in the fall, now we have a corporation that's intermediary, and it is no longer easy to do. There's more steps, more hacks. So those kinds of things can affect how I'm going to plan my project. So I may look at even the ability of when I start budgeting and planning my project, how can I do virtual teams and I don't have to travel? Even those simple things. What resources are available? So what about employees? And this is one that's pretty hard to do. If I need specialized skills, those guys are already employed somewhere, right? And if they're really specialized skills and they're already employed by our company, they probably don't have a lot of extra time on their hands. And you're going to find out as we start working with this, one of the realities is you don't necessarily get, oh, that was not good. So apparently I hit home. So we don't always get the employees we want. Project managers rarely have direct line authority. So sometimes we're going to managers and saying, hey, do you have an employee that can do JavaScript coding? Do you have an employee that knows drywall, and I need to use them for this number of hours? As a manager, do you always give away your best employees? No. So there really is that skill of bargaining. If I can get back there without. I will try not to break my computer for next week. So, those things that we don't have internally. We have external. So, legal restrictions. And that can vary from country to country. Think about these corporations that span the globe. Every country has different laws, different responsibilities. Things that are legal or encouraged in one country may be banned in another. And so one of them that comes to mind pretty quickly, if you work in Mexico, is bribery pretty common in Mexico? Is it legal to do that in the United States? Google has gotten in a lot of trouble overseas. Germany, for example, has very strict privacy laws, and Google has managed to step on toes there and has had to pay several $100 million in fines. Now, the reality is they're pretty small in terms of overall corporate structure, but how do I know? So those kinds of things you need to deal with. If I'm going to be shipping things overseas, how do I deal with it? Environmental things. So, do I work in this building? I have a project to remodel this building, but yet, oh no, it's full of asbestos. Is that an environmental issue that I'm going to have to deal with? So, not only it would be called an environmental issue. So, as you read through this, refer back to that dictionary. So if you got the physical copy, you can flip to 695 and go through. But I would also look at that second textbook I gave you as a slightly easier to read. Now the difficulty is they don't match up section 1, section 1, section 1. So you'll have to do a little jumping around, but in terms of concepts, it might be in some cases easier. So you go through here and you look at this, because this is not a traditional textbook, and it is not necessarily the easiest thing to read, and I acknowledge that. But this is the business framework. If you walk into almost any person who's doing project management, this book is up on their bookshelf, and they pull it out as a resource guide. And then they tailor that to what they need to do. So, this week, let me make sure we're all on the same page. I keep reaching for the mouse, which clearly isn't hooked up. So, this week, have I mentioned how much I love little touch pads? There is a discussion board, and there is also a lot of information in there. So there are, if you scroll down a little further, there are some videos to watch. There is this paper and documentation about it. This paper is not due this Sunday. It is due on the end of week 2. But I want to give you as much time as possible to prepare for that. That way you're able to ask questions and say, is this appropriate? What's appropriate? What am I doing? So, you need to read, watch the videos. You have a weekly quiz. There are only 20 questions in that quiz, and you have 90 minutes to complete it. But if you have not read, not watched the videos, and you just try to Google them, you are not going to get a very good score. I can tell you that. And as of yet, for those of you that are hopeful, they are not on Course Hero as of this week. What a sad state of affairs. So, make sure you do the discussion board. Make sure that you read the material, and you should hopefully have it very quickly if you have ordered it and have not gotten it. If you have not gotten it by Sunday night your book, email me, and I probably will be generous and give you a little bit of an extension so you do not fail the quiz because you do not have the book yet. I know that ordering from our bookstore can sometimes take a while if you are ordering from them. However, the discussion board, there will be no extensions on that, and the initial posting is actually due tonight at midnight. So those of you that are in physical class, we'll give you the next 10 minutes to actually work on that, ask questions, and reflect on that. So you should be able to get that done, at least your initial post. The discussion boards, if you look ahead on them, get progressively a little more complicated not complicated is the right word. You have to put more and more effort into them as the semester goes. But again, we only have 8 of those, so hopefully they're not. If I could reach for the mouse just one more time, it would be really nice.